I walked through the front door expecting a Tuesday. The familiar rhythm of it was a quiet comfort I'd come to rely on. There would be mail on the mahogany credenza, a mix of bills and glossy junk mail. The low, almost subliminal hum of the refrigerator would be the house's quiet pulse. And hanging in the air would be the scent of Celeste's sandalwood candle, the one she lit every evening, trying far too hard to manufacture a sense of peace. Instead, I got a theater. The scene in our living room was so meticulously arranged, it felt less like a home and more like a stage set moments before the opening line. Her parents were arranged like furniture that had opinions. Harrison, her father, sat with an iron straight back on our linen couch, his jaw carved from a quarry of family expectations. His arms were folded, a gate that never opened, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular, as if the very air had disappointed him. Beside him, Beatrice perched on the edge of the cushion, clutching her handbag like it was a parachute she'd forgotten how to deploy. Her blinks were rapid, a fragile, fluttering language of mothers who bake and pray, and ultimately fix nothing. Her brother, Keegan, was leaning against the far wall in that performative, casual way of men auditioning for the role of a bouncer with feelings. And her sister, Tamsin, occupied the main armchair with the same prepackaged smirk she wore at every holiday, an expression that broadcasted, "The house wine is cheap, but the gossip is priceless." And there, center stage, was Celeste. She wore a simple black dress that made her look both elegant and severe. Her blonde hair was immaculate, pulled back in a way that highlighted the sharp, beautiful lines of her face. But it was the smile that stopped me. It was a perfect half-moon curve that never reached her eyes. If charisma could curdle, it would look exactly like that. The clock on the wall, a wedding gift we both hated, ticked just loud enough to register as an irritation. Tonight, it felt like a metronome, counting down to a moment I hadn't prepared for. It had an audience, too. "Since everyone's here," Celeste said, her voice crisp and rehearsed, "we can stop pretending." I set my keys down on the credenza, the soft clink of metal on wood unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Pretending what exactly? Her gesture was vaguely dismissive, a sweep of her hand through the air between us, as though the space itself had committed a felony. "That this is a marriage," she replied, the words clipped. "That you're a good husband. That any of this works." Tamsin exhaled a short, sharp laugh that wanted to be a clap. Keegan's chin bobbed once in a slow, deliberate nod, the universal sign for, "We rehearsed this in the car." Harrison continued his silent communion with the rug, which by now must have confessed to every sin imaginable. Celeste's voice then softened into what she believed empathy sounded like, a tone she usually reserved for discussing tragic news about people she didn't know. "Silas, I want a divorce." The room collectively inhaled on cue, a perfectly timed gasp from the Greek chorus she had assembled. They were waiting for the fireworks. The pleading, the bargaining, the public dismantling of my dignity, so everyone could leave with a moral and a text to send their friends. They were waiting for me to play my part. So I laughed. It wasn't the brittle, desperate laugh of a man falling down an elevator shaft. It was a clean, uncomplicated laugh, the kind that escapes when someone tells you the 2-for-1 special also comes with a free dessert. It was genuine and loud and utterly out of place in her carefully constructed drama. I watched the confidence slide half an inch off Celeste's face, then scramble back into place like a stagehand who tripped on a cable. "God," I said, shaking my head as I looked around at the assembled cast. "You could have just told me at breakfast. We have cereal. Would have saved your family the commute." "This isn't a joke, Silas," she snapped, her voice losing its rehearsed calm. "No," I agreed, my tone still light. "It's choreography, and you nailed your mark. Congratulations." Harrison cleared his throat, a sound like gravel in a tin pail. "Perhaps we should all calm down." "Great idea," I said, already walking towards the hall closet. "I'm very calm. Watch." I pulled out a suitcase zipper, fabric, the polite violence of packing a life away. Keegan pushed himself off the wall, playing his role a beat too late. "Hey man, she's being honest with you." "Finally," I said, opening the suitcase on the floor. "Honesty is efficient. I appreciate it." Beatrice stood, took a hesitant step, then reconsidered as if the floor might crack beneath her. "Silas, maybe if you both just talked." "Talked about what?" I turned, the open mouth of the suitcase waiting. "Perform a reconciliation while everyone scores us on form?" "No, thank you." Celeste planted herself in the doorway to the bedroom, her stance radiating the stubbornness of someone who has never lost an argument to a mirror. "You're not even going to ask why?" I walked past her into the room. "Oh, I'm great at why," I said, pulling a few shirts from the drawer. I folded them into neat, judicial squares. "I'm just better at what now?" I placed them in the suitcase. "You want a divorce? You've informed your jury. Congratulations on the service of process by performance art." I clicked the suitcase shut. The sound was definitive. "I'll get a hotel tonight. I'll come back for the rest tomorrow when the audience is off book." Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. She looked like a fish learning that air has terms and conditions. "You can't just walk away," she said, her voice a mix of disbelief and fury. "I can," I said, walking past her again. "And I am." I paused at the threshold of the living room, looking at all of them. This painting I would never buy. "A small note for future productions," I said to the room at large. "If you're going to ambush a man, maybe don't do it in his own house. The lighting is terrible for villains." The clock ticked. No one applauded. I left. The night outside had that quiet city fatigue, where every traffic light feels philosophical. I drove, not with a destination in mind, but just to put distance between myself and that living room stage. The hotel I found 2 miles away had a vacancy in a lobby that smelled of industrial lemon and meetings that should have been emails. It was perfect. I checked in with the detached efficiency of a man who has recently misplaced a marriage and found his sense of humor. The room was beige, anonymous, forgiving. There were no shared memories embedded in the walls, no ghosts of laughter in the corners. I plugged in my phone and watched the notifications vomit themselves across the screen. Missed calls stacked like bad decisions. Beatrice, 3. Tamsin, 2. Keegan, 1 from a number saved as Keegan unnecessary. And Celeste, the queen of intermittent vibes, had sent a volley of alternating messages. Brief, sharp text missiles like, "We need to finish this," and long, trailing ellipses that looked like she was typing with a conscience. I powered the phone down. Mercy. The laptop came next. Years ago, when Celeste's boutique started hemorrhaging cash and reassurance, we'd had a long, tense conversation about money. She wanted joint everything because love is trust, and trust is visibility. And visibility was apparently me co-signing her boundless optimism. I had started my business the hard way. No venture capital, just late nights fueled by cheap coffee and invoices that eventually learned to pay themselves. I told her there were lines we wouldn't cross. Separate business accounts, a separate emergency fund for myself that she didn't know about, and joint checking and savings for everything else. She'd called it distance. I'd called it seatbelts. Tonight, I was grateful I'd insisted on buckling up. I logged into our joint financials. Numbers don't lie, they just insist. The joint checking account was healthy enough to feed a household and a pretend dream. But the savings had developed a slow leak in recent months. The withdrawals were labeled in the charmingly vague style of people who think notes are personality. Inventory support. Vendor issue. Urgent shipment. I scrolled back, month after month. Inventory support is not a weekend in Vegas. Vendor issues generally don't involve spa packages for 2. Urgent shipments rarely sleep until noon and order room service. On the screen, the spreadsheet arranged itself into a story, and the story had the plot of a sitcom you only watch out of spite. The boutique, her precious passion project, had swam, then sank, then learned to call floating branding. The charges blinking back at me told the real story. Hotel names like aspirational adjectives, dinners at restaurants where they charge extra for the vowels, Uber receipts that could have ferried livestock across the state. I scrolled and scrolled, and with each line item, the beige hotel room felt less like a hotel and more like a witness. Someone once told me that pivotal moments are supposed to feel seismic, the ground shifting beneath your feet. Mine was quieter than that. It was something just clicking inside me, the clean, satisfying click of a deadbolt sliding home. The vague pain of betrayal was gone, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of evidence. The phone, in a Pyrrhic attempt at resurrection, buzzed itself back to life when I plugged it in again to charge. A new text from Celeste. "We need to talk." I typed back without hesitation. "We did. You brought a crowd." The 3 dots appeared, vanished, then reappeared. "You're being childish." I considered the word. Childish is wanting applause for delivering bad news. Childish is spending your husband's money on your boyfriend and calling it inventory. I wrote, "I'll swing by tomorrow for the rest of my things. Make sure the theater is dark." The dots came, went, came again, then dissolved into white space, like courage dropping the call. I went back to the spreadsheet and opened a new tab in my browser. I typed 2 words and a name. Attorneys. Rhiannon Vance. A colleague had mentioned her once, describing her as a sharply dressed shark. Her website looked like a verdict you read standing up. High asset dissolutions. Strategic counsel. Her headshot was that of a woman who expected you to arrive on time with your documents labeled and your illusions pre-shattered. It was exactly what I needed. I called her office number, expecting a voicemail. She answered on the second ring, her voice as dry as paper. Vance. My name is Silas Grant, I said. My wife just announced our divorce to an audience in our living room. There was a brief pause. That's new, she said, without a hint of humor. Come in at 9 tomorrow morning. Bring everything. Bank statements, credit cards, mortgage screenshots. If it looks like evidence, it is. If it looks like drama, it will become evidence. Do not discuss anything privately with her. Don't grandstand. Don't be clever. Be early. Understood. And stop texting her, she added, as if she'd been listening in. Save your oxygen. She hung up. I stared at the phone for a beat, then at the beige ceiling. The room hadn't changed. I had. I showered, set an alarm, and lay down on a bed that wasn't ours. The sheets were clean and unromantic. I liked them immediately. Morning has a way of making expensive mistakes look like they were bought on sale. I dressed in the silence of a man who had downgraded his life in one phone call and somehow upgraded his future. The coffee downstairs tasted like an apology, but it was hot and arrived without commentary. I sat in a booth and read work emails. The world hadn't stopped turning just because mine had been knocked off its axis. Work wanted things. Work always does. I gave it what it needed. My phone vibrated. Grateful to be included, Beatrice's name flashed on the screen. I answered because motherhood, even someone else's, deserves one courtesy call. Silas? The word fell out of her like loose change. Are you all right? I'm fine, Beatrice, I said, and was surprised to realize I was telling the truth. I can't speak about anything of substance. The short version is, I'm meeting with a lawyer this morning. It's going to be handled. A tiny inhale, like a bird learning about the existence of windows. We didn't mean to ambush you. End. You're a good woman, Beatrice, I said, my voice even. You meant to hold your daughter's hand while she jumped. It still felt like an ambush on my end. She paused, edited herself. She was upset. She was clear, I corrected. Upset as a storm, clear as a sky with no sympathy. Harrison, he thinks. I know what Harrison thinks, I cut in gently. He thinks in capital letters. He always has. Silas, she whispered, and now the tremor in her voice had a face. I hope you won't destroy her. I looked at my reflection in the dark lobby window. I didn't look like a destroyer. I looked like someone who had finally learned how to stop apologizing for other people's decisions. I don't have to, I said. Celeste is ambitious. The only thing she ever destroys is the furniture on her own stage. I ended the call, finished the coffee, collected my folder of paper trails and digital receipts, and stepped out into a morning that felt like the first clean page of a legal pad. Rhiannon Vance's office was glass and steel, and the rare kind of carpet that forgives expensive shoes. Her assistant, who looked like adrenaline in a pencil skirt, pointed me to a chair without breaking rhythm in her typing. Rhiannon appeared exactly on time, which is to say, earlier than most human beings are capable of. She was tall, severe, with no jewelry, except a watch that said, I bill in increments you can feel. Silas, she said, shaking my hand with the professionalism of a surgeon who prefers success stories. Let's sharpen the knife. We sat in her office, a minimalist space overlooking the city. She opened a legal pad and without flourish said, Tell me how the show started. I told her everything. The living room, the audience, the lines delivered like scripture. The part where I laughed and walked away. She didn't smile, but she made one note, just one. Good, she said. You didn't take the bait. I like fish, I replied. I don't like hooks. She held out a hand and I slid the folder across the polished table. It was a paper avalanche that she reorganized into a mountain range of deceit. She skimmed, segmented, and arranged the documents the way a pianist warms up by humiliating the keys. Her eyes missed nothing. Here's what happens now, she said finally, her gaze level and unblinking. Today, we file. We request full financial disclosure from her and her business. We file an injunction to freeze all joint accounts, except for ordinary, documented living expenses. And you, she pointed a pen at me, do not speak to her. Not in person, not on the phone, not by text. Without me. Ever. She leaned forward slightly. If she cries, it's theater. If she shouts, it's theater. If she whispers apologies, it's theater. Your job is to stop buying tickets. Understood? Understood. She tapped a page with a nail that clicked like a metronome. And Silas, given these spending patterns she thinks are inventory support, we're going to find more. There's always more. When people lie about money, they do it the way toddlers lie about cookies. Crumbs are everywhere. Helpful image, I said. You'll hate it by Wednesday, she replied flatly. She closed the folder. Go back to the house. Pack what you need for the foreseeable future. Be polite. Be quick. Assume you are being watched or recorded. If there's a scene, you leave. If there's a plea, you leave. If there's a promise that's my favorite, you leave. She stood, already done with me, which somehow felt like being expertly held. We'll talk this afternoon after we filed. Ugh. Back in the elevator, I watched my reflection fragment across the steel doors. People talk about losing themselves in a divorce. I felt found, like the version of me that had stopped making exceptions had finally forwarded his new address. I drove back to the house that afternoon, the same driveway, the same porch, but the air felt different, charged, like a courtroom where the verdict was already written in somebody else's lipstick. Celeste's car was there, but the fleet of her family's support vehicles was gone. Good. One performance per week was enough for anyone. She opened the door before I could put the key in, clearly stationed like a guard dog who had traded its bark for eyeliner. Her eyes were red, though with Celeste, it was impossible to know if the tears were genuine or just a new shade of strategy. We need to talk, she said, blocking the doorway. We already did, I replied, brushing past her. Remember? Sold-out show. Our living room. Standing ovation was optional. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Her voice followed me into the bedroom. I set the suitcase on the bed and started folding clothes with the precision of a man who refused to let fabric wrinkle while his marriage crumbled. Really? Because it sounded pretty definitive. Quote, I want a divorce. Ring any bells? Celeste hovered in the doorway like a stage manager, waiting for the lead actor to forget his lines. I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. I dropped 2 pairs of jeans into the case. No, I corrected gently. You said things you meant but didn't expect me to agree with. There's a difference. She crossed her arms, leaning against the frame, trying to summon that effortless confidence she wore like perfume. Don't you think we should try to work this out? 5 years of marriage should count for something. I zipped one side of the suitcase. 5 years should have counted for basic respect. 5 years should have counted for a private conversation instead of turning our life into a reality show for your family's entertainment. A flush crept up her neck. She raised her chin, the universal sign for attack mode. I thought you'd try harder. Oh, try harder to what? I stopped folding and looked at her directly. Convince you that I'm worth staying married to? Beg in front of Tamsin and Keegan so they can text their friends about it later? Is that your idea of a marriage? Her voice trembled, just enough to sound like she'd learned it in acting school. That's not what happened. I pulled out my phone, tapped a screenshot, and held it up between us like a gospel. Funny thing about emergencies, Celeste. They leave paper trails. I enlarged the image. Remember that $3,000 withdrawal last month for urgent boutique expenses? Turns out the emergency was a weekend at the Bellagio with your business partner. The color drained from her face so fast I almost expected a medical team to rush in. How did you? Credit card statements, I said, my voice cold and flat. Fascinating literature, especially the part about 2 adjoining hotel rooms, spa treatments, and dinners that cost more than our mortgage payment, all labeled as inventory support. Very innovative bookkeeping. She clutched the door frame for support. That was networking. We were looking for investors. In a casino? I snapped the laptop open on the bed, scrolling through receipts like a magician revealing trick after trick. At a spa? Romantic dinners disguised as vendor meetings? Celeste, you didn't build a boutique. You built an affair with catering. Her jaw tightened, then loosened. That's not fair. Fair would have been you asking for a divorce privately, I shot back. Fair would have been you not dragging your family in to witness my supposed downfall. Fair would have been you not using our joint funds to bankroll your new boyfriend's room service. Celeste's hands were shaking, but her voice tried for one last act of defiance. You hired someone to follow me. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. I didn't need to. You used our credit cards for everything. Every meal, every room, every stupid champagne brunch. It's all here in black and white. You practically sent me love letters with itemized receipts. She sank onto the edge of the dresser, pale and trembling, the fight finally gone. They can't know about this. My family. It would ruin everything. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to humiliate me in front of them. I picked up the suitcase, setting it upright on the floor. But don't worry. Unlike you, I don't need an audience to end a relationship. Her voice cracked. What do you want? Money? I'll pay you back, Silas, I swear. I paused at the door, turning to face her one last time. I don't want your money, I said coldly. I want you to understand something very clearly. On Tuesday night, you thought you were humiliating me. What you actually did was free me. You freed me from pretending you were someone I could still respect. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, I didn't care whether they were real or just stage props. I walked through the living room, noting how she'd erased all evidence of her family's tribunal. The cushions were plumped, the coffee table cleared, the ambiance reset as if nothing had ever happened. But it had, and it couldn't be undone. On Saturday afternoon, Celeste's entire entourage filed into Rhiannon Vance's conference room, like sheep being herded into a slaughterhouse. It was a cold, modern room with a view of the city that seemed to judge everything below it. Harrison entered first, as stiff as an indictment. Beatrice trailed behind him, her purse held to her chest like a flotation device in a storm. Keegan rolled his shoulders as if expecting a bar fight, looking entirely out of place amidst the leather and polished chrome. And Tamsin, she wore the same satisfied smirk from Tuesday night, only now it looked more like a defense mechanism than a weapon. Celeste arrived last, pale and hollow-eyed. The swagger from her living room performance had been left somewhere between the boutique's fraudulent balance sheets and the spa receipts from Las Vegas. Rhiannon waited until everyone was seated. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Authority dripped from her like caffeine from an IV. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice cutting through the tension. As you witnessed on Tuesday, my client, Silas, was informed by his wife, Celeste, of her request for a divorce. My client has accepted this request. However, some context was missing from that announcement. She slid the first folder across the long, dark table. The whisper of paper was louder than Celeste's ragged breathing. These are the credit card statements from the joint marital account for the last 6 months. One by one, the receipts became bullets. The Vegas trip marked as a business conference. Dinners for 2 at restaurants that didn't bother with menus under $50. Hotel rooms that coincided a little too neatly with Celeste's late-night inventory emergencies. Harrison's jaw tightened with every page he turned. Beatrice's eyes darted between the documents and her daughter, as if willing them to rewrite themselves. Keegan leaned forward, his tough guy facade crumbling into confusion. Tamsin's smirk finally faltered, replaced by the flatline expression of someone recalculating their loyalties. Those don't prove anything, Celeste said, her voice thin. We were just working together. I leaned forward, my own voice smooth as a scalpel. Is that why the boutique needed to fund spa treatments, Celeste? A very hands-on approach to fashion retail? Tamsin's eyes widened, finally connecting the dots. You've been cheating on him? It's complicated, Celeste snapped. Number. Harrison's voice was a hammer on stone, cutting her off. It is not complicated. You cheated. You lied. You stole from this marriage to pay for it. He jabbed a finger toward her, his face a mask of cold fury. And then you staged a circus in our living room to make him look like the failure. Celeste's face flushed a deep crimson. Dad, don't dad me, he barked. You humiliated him in front of us, and all the while you were the one with filth on your hands. Beatrice finally found her voice, soft but sharp. She made mistakes, Harrison, but she's our daughter. We don't throw her to the wolves for slipping. And slipping? Harrison exploded, his voice reverberating in the quiet room. This isn't slipping, Beatrice. This is 6 months of calculated deceit. This is gambling with our family's name while stealing from her husband. Keegan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He's not wrong, Celeste. What the hell were you thinking? Celeste's eyes filled with tears, the kind that might have worked on me 5 years ago. I just felt neglected. Silas was always at work, Always so busy. Oh, don't you dare, I cut in, and my tone silenced the room. Neglected wives ask for attention. Cheating wives stage distractions. Let's not pretend this was about loneliness. This was about entitlement. You wanted both. The marriage for appearances and the affair for thrills. And you expected me to play the villain when you finally got bored. Rhiannon intervened, crisp as breaking glass. She turned another page in her file. Scared people don't drain joint accounts and take boyfriends to Vegas. Scared people don't stage public divorce announcements. This isn't fear, this is calculation. And bad calculation at that. She slid another set of documents across the table. And it gets worse. These are loan applications, filed in Celeste's name over the last 3 months for business expansion. In reality, her partner pressured her into signing them. He disappeared the moment things got complicated. She's been left holding debt obligations she can't possibly cover. Celeste's head snapped toward her. How do you know that? Rhiannon offered a faint, merciless smile. Because banks love paperwork. And paperwork, Mrs. Grant, doesn't lie. The silence that followed was almost delicious. Harrison exhaled like he'd aged 10 years in one breath. Tamsin just stared, her mouth slightly agape. Celeste turned to me then, desperate, her voice breaking. Silas, please, don't let them think this. Don't let them hate me. We can fix this. I'll end it with him. I'll pay everything back. I stood up, buttoning my jacket with surgical precision. Celeste, you've already taught me everything I needed to know about you. Tuesday night, you thought you had all the power. But power doesn't come from humiliating people. It comes from refusing to play along. And you just learned the difference. Rhiannon closed the folder with a definitive snap. We will be seeking full restitution for the misappropriated funds, in addition to the divorce settlement, legal fees included. Celeste collapsed into her chair, sobbing without restraint. Beatrice bent toward her, whispering comfort, while Harrison stood rigid, a granite figure of disappointment. Keegan shook his head slowly, disgust etched across his features. And Tamsin sat in absolute silence, the smirk long gone, replaced by something colder and more profound. Shame. For the first time in years, Celeste wasn't the star of the performance. She was the cautionary tale, and I was just the man who had stopped buying tickets. By the following week, the script had flipped entirely. Celeste's boutique closed overnight, a for leases sign already pasted in the window. Her business partner had disappeared like a magician who never planned to return for the applause, and the shiny loans were now millstones tied around her neck. She found me in my hotel lobby, showing up unannounced. Her eyes were swollen, her hair unpolished. She looked less like the queen of Tuesday night and more like someone who had just been evicted from her own fantasy. Silas, please, she begged, following me as I walked toward the hotel restaurant. I'll end it with him. I already did. I'll pay everything back. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't even slow down. What it would have taken was honesty, Celeste. What it would have taken was not blowing up our marriage for an audience. You don't get to hit the reset button just because your boyfriend ghosted you. Her voice cracked. My family won't even speak to me. My father said I disgraced his name. I raised an eyebrow, a flicker of dark humor rising in me. Congratulations. You finally impressed Harrison. He's been waiting for years to use that word. She reached out, her fingers almost brushing my arm. I still love you. End of sex. I stopped and turned, my voice sharp and humorless. Celeste, people who love each other don't stage interventions, drain bank accounts, and gamble a marriage on a man who vanishes at the first sign of a subpoena. You don't love me. You love attention. And the spotlight just went out. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks now. So that's it? You're just going to destroy me? I leaned in, my voice calm, surgical, final. You destroyed yourself. I'm just refusing to clean up the mess this time. I left her there in a lobby chair, small and trembling, while guests passed by without even noticing her. The woman who once demanded a spotlight had finally learned what real obscurity felt like. 3 months later, Rhiannon slid the final papers across her conference table. Congratulations, Silas. Full restitution, the house, and enough left to cover my fees twice over. Celeste hadn't even fought. Her lawyer, a man who looked perpetually tired, had advised her not to. The evidence was overwhelming, and without her family's financial or moral support, she had nothing left to fight with. Her boutique was gone. Her debts were hers alone. You handled this with restraint, Rhiannon commented as she packed her files. That's rarer than you think. Restraint. A funny word for someone who had just gutted his own marriage like a fish. But she was right. I hadn't screamed or begged or punched walls. I had just walked away. And in the end, that had hurt Celeste more than any tantrum ever could. 6 months after that, I ran into her in a grocery store, somewhere between the organic apples and the avocados. She looked smaller, as if gravity had been working overtime on her. There was no makeup armor, no commanding smile, just Celeste, stripped of all her stage lighting. "How are you?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm well," I said, and it was the simple truth. She twisted her hands together. "I heard you bought a bigger house. Needed more space." "For what?" she asked, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "For living without drama." That one landed. She flinched, then tried again. "Silas, I've been in therapy. I'm really working on myself. I was wondering, maybe we could get coffee sometime. Just to talk." And I looked at her. I really looked at her. This was the same woman who had stood in my living room and demanded an audience for my humiliation. The same woman who had drained our future and gambled it all on a man who left her with nothing but debt and silence. The woman who had built her entire life on a foundation of performance. "No," I said simply. Her eyes watered instantly. "Why not? Don't you miss what we had?" A faint, sad smile touched my lips. "I miss who I thought you were, Celeste. But I've come to realize that person never actually existed." I pushed my cart forward. "Wait, Silas," she called after me, but I didn't turn around. Because the truth is, consequences don't pause just because someone begs. And dignity isn't something you fight for after it's been taken. It's something you never give away in the first place. Celeste had wanted a divorce with maximum drama. She got one with maximum consequences. And me? I got the only prize worth winning: freedom.